October 16, 1962, 8:45 a.m., the Cabinet Room of the White House. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy sits at the mahogany conference table, his hands clasped tightly as he stares at aerial reconnaissance photographs that could trigger the Third World War. The images show Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shore. The 45-year-old president, whose Irish Catholic ancestors fled poverty and persecution to build one of America's most powerful political dynasties, now holds the fate of human civilization in his hands. What the American people don't know, as Kennedy contemplates these ominous photographs, is that the man making these life-or-death decisions descends from a bloodline forged by centuries of struggle against oppression, shaped by the potato famines of Ireland, and molded by generations of ambitious immigrants who transformed themselves from impoverished refugees into American royalty. The Kennedy name, which would become synonymous with political power and tragic destiny, began its American journey in the coffin ships of the 1840s, carrying dreams and desperation across the Atlantic Ocean. The Kennedy lineage in America begins with Patrick Kennedy, born in 1823 in Dunganstown, County Wexford, Ireland. Patrick lived in a one-room cottage with his parents, John Kennedy and Mary Johanna Kennedy, in a region devastated by British colonial policies that had reduced the Irish population to tenant farmers, working land owned by English landlords. John Kennedy, Patrick's father, had been born around 1790 during a period when Irish Catholics faced severe legal restrictions known as the Penal Laws, which prohibited them from owning land, practicing their religion openly, or participating in political life. The Kennedy family's Irish roots stretch back even further to Diarmaid Sinead, a clan chieftain who lived in County Cork during the 12th century. The name Kennedy derives from the Gaelic Sinadig, meaning armored head or ugly head, suggesting a warrior lineage that would manifest centuries later in the political battles fought by their American descendants. Throughout medieval and early modern Ireland, the Kennedys were members of the Dalcatian tribe, related to the powerful O'Brien clan that had produced High Kings of Ireland. By the early 19th century, the Kennedy family had been reduced to subsistence farming in Wexford, barely surviving on a diet of potatoes and occasional milk from their single cow. Patrick Kennedy's childhood was marked by the constant threat of eviction, as English landlords could remove tenants at will, and often did so to consolidate small farms into larger, more profitable operations. The family lived in what was essentially a hovel, with earthen floors, no windows, and a thatched roof that leaked during Ireland's frequent rains. Patrick married Bridget Murphy in 1849, just as the Irish potato famine reached its most devastating phase. Bridget had been born in 1821 in County Wexford to a family of farmers who had managed to survive the various agricultural crises that periodically swept through Ireland. The Murphy lineage could be traced back to the ancient kingdom of Leinster, where they had served as brehons or lawgivers, before the English conquest reduced them to tenant farmers like so many other Irish families. The potato blight that began in 1845 and continued through 1852 created conditions of starvation and disease that killed over 1 million Irish people and forced another million to emigrate. Patrick and Bridget Kennedy witnessed their neighbors dying of typhus and cholera, saw entire families evicted from their homes, and watched as British authorities continued to export food from Ireland, even as the Irish population starved. The decision to leave Ireland was not a choice, but a desperate attempt at survival. On October 17, 1849, Patrick and Bridget Kennedy, along with their infant daughter Margaret, boarded the bark Washington Townsend in Liverpool, England, bound for Boston. The journey across the Atlantic took 6 weeks in barely survivable conditions. The ship was overcrowded with Irish refugees, many of whom were already weakened by starvation and disease. The Kennedys traveled in steerage, crammed into the ship's hold with hundreds of other immigrants in a space with no sanitation, limited fresh air, and inadequate food supplies. During the crossing, Bridget Kennedy gave birth to their second child, but the infant died within days due to the horrific conditions aboard the ship. This tragedy was repeated throughout the ship, as disease spread rapidly in the overcrowded quarters. By the time the Washington Townsend reached Boston Harbor on November 30th, 1849, more than 40 passengers had died during the voyage, their bodies committed to the Atlantic Ocean in brief, sorrowful ceremonies. Patrick Kennedy's arrival in Boston marked the beginning of the Kennedy family's American Odyssey. Boston in 1849 was a city dominated by Protestant Yankees who viewed the influx of Irish Catholic immigrants with suspicion and hostility. Signs reading "No Irish Need Apply" were common in shop windows, and the newcomers were forced to settle in overcrowded slums in the North End and South Boston. The Kennedy family initially lived in a basement apartment on Broad Street, sharing the space with two other Irish families, in conditions that were scarcely better than what they had left behind in Ireland. Patrick found work as a cooper, making barrels for the thriving shipping industry that connected Boston to markets around the world. The work was physically demanding and poorly paid, but it provided enough income for the family to survive while they adjusted to their new country. Patrick's skills as a barrel maker were in demand because Boston's merchants needed containers for shipping rum, molasses, fish, and other commodities to ports throughout the Atlantic world. On December 14, 1851, Bridget Kennedy gave birth to their son Patrick Joseph Kennedy, who would become the first generation of Kennedys to achieve significant success in America. The younger Patrick, known as PJ, was born into an Irish-American community that was beginning to organize itself politically and economically. Despite the discrimination they faced from the established Yankee elite, tragedy struck the Kennedy family when Patrick Sr. died of cholera on November 22, 1858, leaving 30-year-old Bridget to raise their 4 children alone. Bridget Kennedy's response to widowhood demonstrated the resilience that would characterize the Kennedy women for generations. Rather than remarry or depend on charity, she opened a small notions shop on Meridian Street in East Boston, selling sewing supplies, candies, and household items to her Irish neighbors. Bridget's shop became more than just a business. It served as an informal community center where Irish immigrants could gather to share news from home, discuss American politics, and support each other through the challenges of adapting to a new culture. Bridget Kennedy understood that economic independence was essential for her family's survival and advancement, and she instilled this lesson in all her children, particularly her son PJ, who would later apply these principles on a much larger scale. Patrick Joseph Kennedy, born December 14, 1851, represented the first generation of Kennedys to be born as American citizens, but his childhood was still marked by the poverty and discrimination that characterized Irish-American life in 19th-century Boston. PJ attended local Catholic schools where he learned to read and write in English while maintaining his Irish cultural identity. The Catholic Church played a central role in Irish-American life, providing not only spiritual guidance but also social services and political organization that helped the community resist Protestant domination. As a teenager, PJ Kennedy worked as a stevedore on the Boston waterfront, loading and unloading ships that brought goods from around the world. The waterfront was controlled by Irish immigrants who had gradually taken over jobs that Yankees considered beneath their dignity, but the work was dangerous and the pay was irregular. PJ observed that the men who controlled the taverns and boarding houses near the docks wielded more power and earned more money than the laborers, and he began to formulate plans for his own advancement. In 1872, at the age of 21, PJ Kennedy used money he had saved from his waterfront work, supplemented by a loan from his mother, to purchase a tavern on Haymarket Square in Boston. The tavern, which he named Kennedy's, became the foundation of the Kennedy family's rise to prominence in Boston Irish society. PJ understood that success in Irish-American Boston required more than just business acumen. It demanded political connections, community leadership, and the ability to navigate between Irish cultural traditions and American opportunities. Kennedy's Tavern quickly became a gathering place for Irish longshoremen, politicians, and businessmen. PJ provided more than just drinks. He offered credit to workers between jobs, served as an informal bank for people who couldn't access traditional financial institutions, and helped settle disputes within the community. His tavern became a place where Irish immigrants could conduct business, arrange jobs, and organize political activities away from the scrutiny of the Yankee establishment. The success of his tavern allowed P.J. Kennedy to expand into other businesses. He purchased additional saloons, invested in a coal company, and eventually acquired interests in banking and real estate. By the 1880s, he had become one of the wealthiest Irish Americans in Boston, but he never forgot his family's origins in the slums of East Boston. P.J. used his growing wealth and influence to help other Irish immigrants, providing jobs, loans, and political support to members of his community. On November 23, 1887, P.J. Kennedy married Mary Augusta Hickey, a second-generation Irish American whose family had achieved middle-class respectability through her father's work as a police officer and her mother's skills as a seamstress. Mary Augusta, born on December 6, 1857, brought to the marriage not only her own family's modest prosperity, but also important social connections within Boston's Irish Catholic community. The Hickey family's American story paralleled that of the Kennedys in many ways. Mary Augusta's father, James Hickey, had been born in County Cork, Ireland, in 1828, and had emigrated to Boston during the famine years. Unlike Patrick Kennedy, who died young, James Hickey lived long enough to see his family achieve stability and respectability in America. He joined the Boston Police Department in 1855, becoming one of the first Irish Catholics to serve as a police officer in a city where law enforcement had been dominated by Protestant Americans. James Hickey's service as a police officer provided his family with a steady income and social respectability, but it also exposed him to the ethnic and religious tensions that characterized Boston in the mid-19th century. Irish Catholic police officers faced suspicion from both the Yankee establishment, which questioned their loyalty to American institutions, and from some members of their own community, who viewed them as enforcers of Protestant authority. James navigated these challenges by maintaining strong ties to the Catholic Church and the Irish community, while proving his competence and loyalty as a law enforcement officer. Mary Augusta Hickey Kennedy brought to her marriage with P.J. Kennedy the social graces and cultural refinement that would help the Kennedy family transition from working-class origins to upper-middle-class respectability. She had been educated in Catholic schools run by nuns, where she learned not only academic subjects, but also the deportment and cultural skills expected of ladies in Victorian America. Her marriage to P.J. Kennedy represented the union of two Irish-American families that had achieved success through different routes, the Kennedys through business entrepreneurship and the Hickeys through public service. The first child of P.J. and Mary Augusta Kennedy was Joseph Patrick Kennedy, born on September 6, 1888 in East Boston. Joe Kennedy's birth represented the emergence of the third generation of Kennedys in America, a generation that would no longer be satisfied with local success, but would aspire to national prominence and political power. The America into which Joe Kennedy was born was rapidly industrializing and expanding westward, creating new opportunities for ambitious young men who could adapt to changing economic conditions. Joe Kennedy's childhood in the 1890s was vastly different from his grandfather Patrick's experience as an Irish refugee. The Kennedy family now lived in a comfortable house in East Boston, employed Irish servants, and enjoyed the social status that came with P.J.'s success as a businessman and political leader. Joe attended Catholic schools where he excelled academically and demonstrated the competitive drive that would characterize his entire life. The Kennedy household was one where politics, business, and Irish cultural pride were constant topics of conversation. P.J. Kennedy served multiple terms in the Massachusetts House of Representatives and was a powerful figure in Boston's Democratic Party organization. Young Joe Kennedy absorbed lessons about the importance of political connections, the value of loyalty, and the necessity of maintaining power through both economic success and political influence. In 1901, 13-year-old Joe Kennedy enrolled at Boston Latin School, the oldest public school in America and the traditional training ground for Boston's elite. His admission to Boston Latin represented a significant milestone for the Kennedy family, as the school had been dominated by Protestant Yankees since its founding in 1635. Joe was one of only a handful of Irish Catholic students in his class, and he faced both subtle and overt discrimination from classmates whose families had attended the school for generations. Despite these challenges, Joe Kennedy thrived at Boston Latin, where he excelled in mathematics and developed the analytical skills that would later serve him in business and finance. He also participated in baseball and football, sports that provided opportunities to compete with and gain acceptance from his Protestant classmates. Joe's success at Boston Latin demonstrated that Irish Catholics could compete academically and socially with the Yankee elite, challenging stereotypes about Irish intelligence and capability. After graduating from Boston Latin in 1906, Joe Kennedy faced a crucial decision about his higher education. While his father, P.J., would have been content to see his son join the family businesses in Boston, Joe had larger ambitions that required a more prestigious educational credential. He applied to Harvard University, the pinnacle of American higher education and the traditional preserve of the Protestant establishment. Joe Kennedy's admission to Harvard in 1906 represented another breakthrough for the Kennedy family and for Irish Catholics in Boston generally. Harvard had admitted only a small number of Catholic students, and Joe was keenly aware that he was being scrutinized as a representative of his community. He approached his Harvard education with the same competitive intensity he had shown at Boston Latin, determined to prove that an Irish Catholic could succeed at the highest levels of American society. At Harvard, Joe Kennedy studied economics and business, subjects that aligned with his ambitions for financial success and social advancement. He maintained good grades while also participating in extracurricular activities, including the baseball team and various social clubs. However, he was excluded from the most prestigious social organizations, such as the Porcellian Club, which remained closed to Catholics regardless of their academic achievements or social connections. The discrimination Joe Kennedy experienced at Harvard was subtle but pervasive, and it reinforced his determination to achieve success on such a scale that religious prejudice would become irrelevant. He observed how his Protestant classmates used family connections to secure advantageous positions in banking and business, and he resolved to create similar opportunities for himself and his future family through his own efforts and achievements. During his Harvard years, Joe Kennedy also began courting Rose Elizabeth Fitzgerald, the daughter of John Francis "Honey" Fitzgerald, a prominent Irish-American politician who served as mayor of Boston. Rose, born on July 22, 1890, was the eldest child of a family that had achieved even greater political prominence than the Kennedys. Her courtship with Joe Kennedy represented the union of two of Boston's most successful Irish-American families. Rose Fitzgerald's family background provided another important strand in the genealogy that would produce John F. Kennedy. The Fitzgerald family's American journey began with Thomas Fitzgerald, who emigrated from County Limerick, Ireland, in 1854 during the aftermath of the potato famine. Thomas Fitzgerald had been born in 1823 in the village of Bruff, where his family had worked as tenant farmers on an estate owned by English landlords. The Fitzgerald family's Irish origins could be traced back to the Norman invasion of Ireland in 1169, when the family name was Fitzgerald, meaning son of Gerald. The Irish Fitzgeralds had been among the most powerful Norman families in medieval Ireland, serving as Earls of Kildare and Desmond, and controlling vast territories in the south and west of the island. However, centuries of conflict with English authorities and economic changes had reduced most Fitzgerald families to the same tenant-farmer status as their Irish neighbors. Thomas Fitzgerald's emigration to America followed the same pattern as the Kennedy family's journey, but he arrived in Boston several years later, when the Irish community had become more established and organized. Thomas found work as a laborer, but quickly moved into the grocery business, recognizing that serving the needs of the growing Irish population offered better opportunities than manual labor. Thomas Fitzgerald married Rosanna Cox in 1857, beginning a family that would eventually produce 12 children. Rosanna Cox Fitzgerald was born in Ireland around 1835 and had emigrated with her family during the famine years. The Cox family had origins in County Cork, where they had worked as farmers and occasionally as traders in the local markets. John Francis Fitzgerald, known throughout his life as Honey Fitz, was born on February 11, 1863, to Thomas and Rose Anna Fitzgerald. Like P.J. Kennedy, Honey Fitz represented the second generation of Irish Americans who would no longer be content with merely surviving in America, but would aspire to leadership and influence within their adopted country. Honey Fitz's childhood in the North End of Boston was characterized by the same ethnic tensions and economic struggles that affected all Irish families. But his parents' grocery business provided greater stability than many Irish families enjoyed. Thomas Fitzgerald understood the importance of education and political involvement, and he encouraged his son to excel in school while also learning the practical skills of running a business and building relationships with dinner table conversations focused on current events, politics, and the expectation that each Kennedy child would contribute to the family's continued rise in American society. His success represented not just personal achievement, but the fulfillment of his family's 100-year journey from Irish poverty to American power. Throughout his political career, Kennedy carried with him the experiences and values that had been shaped by his family's unique history. His understanding of discrimination and exclusion, inherited from generations of Irish ancestors who had faced religious and ethnic prejudice, informed his commitment to civil rights and social justice. His family's emphasis on education and intellectual achievement influenced his approach to policymaking and his vision of America's role in the world. The Kennedy presidency from 1961 to 1963 represented the culmination of the American dream for a family that had begun its journey in the cottages of County Wexford. Jack Kennedy's inaugural address, with its famous call to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, reflected the sense of obligation and service that had been instilled in him from childhood. Kennedy's presidency was marked by both triumph and crisis, from his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis to his support for the Civil Rights Movement. His assassination in Dallas on November 22, 1963, cut short a life and career that had embodied the possibilities and promises of American democracy, while also reflecting the persistent challenges of prejudice, violence, and division that continued to characterize American society. The legacy of John F. Kennedy extends far beyond his brief presidency to encompass the broader story of Irish-American achievement and the transformation of American society in the 20th century. His life represented the fulfillment of dreams that had sustained his ancestors through famine, discrimination, and poverty, while also pointing toward a future in which ethnic and religious differences would no longer determine a person's opportunities for success and service. The bloodline that produced John F. Kennedy, stretching from the tenant farmers of Ireland through the tavern keepers and politicians of Boston to the halls of the White House, illustrates both the promise and the complexity of the American experience. It demonstrates how individual ambition, family solidarity, and historical circumstance can combine to create possibilities that would have been unimaginable to earlier generations. Today, more than 60 years after Kennedy's assassination, his presidency continues to symbolize both the achievements and the unfulfilled potential of American democracy. The young president who challenged Americans to reach for the moon and to build a more just society represented the best aspirations of a nation built by immigrants and refugees, seeking better lives for themselves and their children. The story of the Kennedy family bloodline, from Patrick Kennedy's desperate flight from famine-stricken Ireland to Jack Kennedy's inspirational leadership of the free world. Anyone willing to work hard and serve others can rise to the highest levels of achievement and influence.